What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to Daryl Sloan for the donation to the channel via the Cash App. All right, much respect to Daryl Sloan for time and time again donating to this channel, showing love. And Daryl Sloan is a NBA historian, as I have said before, of the highest order. He and I have many discussions about these great players of the past and how in today's sports world, the legends just don't get the same love. And it's especially true in the NBA community. The NBA is the one major sport where you have a majority of the current fan base, for some reason, showing hostility and just complete, total disrespect of players of the past. Um, I'm not saying you're supposed to get down on your knees and worship these players. That's not what we're saying. But at least just respect them as pioneers of the sport. They can't even do that. It just shows the sheer ignorance that some of these modern day fans display, in my opinion. So shout out to Daryl Sloan for once again coming through with the donation in the Cash App. And to anyone who wants to donate to this channel, if you choose to, you can do so in the links in the description box below via the PayPal or the Cash App or in the pinned comment in the comment section. So I have a lot more videos coming for you guys on Too Raw for TV, some on Too Raw for Sports, and I still have to upload the two Patreon videos. I meant to do them yesterday. I had a lot of stuff I was doing yesterday, so I'm a little bit delayed in that. Sorry for that, but I will upload them today. Now let's get to this video. Now Kevin Love has been playing a lot better lately. Sometimes Kevin Love is just forgotten in the NBA world. Ever since LeBron James left Cleveland, Kevin Love has just been sort of just languishing in Cleveland, um, not playing anywhere near the level that he played before, to the point where you kind of just thought that, well, he's deteriorating as a player. But maybe the issue with Kevin Love is similar to what happened with, at least for a while, Blake Griffin in Detroit, where he's just not inspired. He just wasn't inspired to play at a maximum level, um, because his team stunk. I mean, up until this year, Cleveland stunk, but we've seen a renewed effort from uh, Kevin Love, a more rejuvenated Kevin Love over the last 4 or 5 games, and this um, brings forth a comparison that we used to see a long time ago, going close to 10 years ago when Kevin Love was at the top of his game when he played in Minnesota. He was often compared to two NBA players at that time. He was compared loosely on the rebounding ability aspect to Moses Malone. But the historical comparison that most people made was to Bob Pettit. Now, is that a warranted comparison? Kevin Love and Bob Pettit. Well, from a career perspective, if you look at peak for peak, um, Kevin Love had a couple of years in Minnesota where he averaged something like 25 and 13. One year, I think he averaged like 26 and 15, leading the NBA in rebounding. And that's when he was putting up a lot of, games of, just racking up double doubles like it was nothing. That version of Kevin Love was younger, obviously. He would occasionally go out and shoot from three, but that Kevin Love was bigger. That Kevin Love was more around 265, pushing 270, had the size and strength to bang down low, and he was gobbling up rebounds with reckless abandon. Even that version of Kevin Love, to me, though, paled in comparison to the best version of Bob Pettit. Bob Pettit was, if we remember, although this probably would have been different had Paul Arizin not served so much time, uh, overseas in the during the Korean War. Uh, but Bob Pettit was the first NBA player to crack 20,000 career points. When he retired in 1965, he was the all-time leading scorer, although that only would last for like a year before Will Chamberlain surpassed him. But when he retired in 1965 with 20,880 points, Bob Pettit had averaged 26 points and 16 rebounds per game. As a matter of fact, I believe his averages were 20, something like 26 point, what was it, 26.4 points and 16.2 rebounds. And until the arrival of Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, he was the NBA's premier rebounder. And of course, he is the only player, and his team is the only team to defeat the Bill Russell led Celtic dynasty in the finals. The only team. In 1967, they didn't make it to the finals. They were ousted by Wilt's Sixers. So Bob Pettit is the only player to actually beat Bill Russell in the finals. And in that particular game, that game six, Bob Pettit came up with arguably the greatest closeout game in finals history. Giannis Antetokounmpo last year may have surpassed it, but Bob Pettit in that game had 50 points and 19 rebounds, if I'm not mistaken, in that closeout victory, and needed all of those points. And one of the caveats about that series still is that would they have won if Bill Russell had sprained his ankle, if I'm not mistaken? I think it happened in Game 4 of that series, or Game 3 or Game 4. Um, but Bob Pettit was much more dynamic. He was more consistent, more dominant. Um, now, he did only shoot 43.6% for his career. But if you know anything about the NBA at that time, field goal percentages were markedly lower. Some of that had to do with the quality of basketball, honestly, the basketball that they used. Um, you could even argue poor lighting at some of those stadiums. Also, if you look at the NBA at that time, it was a really fast paced league, even faster than today, which makes it laughable when they say that the players of today have more stamina than the players then. That's ridiculous. And I could prove it to you. They actually played at a faster pace in that era. They played harder on defense and they played more minutes. Uh, a lot of players today only average 32 to 34 minutes a game. Back in those days, they played a faster pace, even than today. But many of those stars played 40 minutes and more. So they were in absolute peak physical condition. And you saw fewer injuries back then as compared to today. I think some of that has to do with the fact a lot of these players are probably carrying still too much excess weight. Not necessarily fat, but just too much weight and too much muscle to be basketball players. Maybe they'll be more suited to be baseball players than some of these guys, or boxers, or uh, safeties, or smaller position football players. So these guys just carry too much body weight. Whereas you look at a guy like Kevin Durant, look how he recovered from an Achilles rupture. Look how outside of the Achilles rupture, he's been relatively injury free for his career. I think some of that has to do with his remarkably low body weight. But anyway, for the era, Bob Pettit shot a high percentage. As a matter of fact, one of those years, I believe he led the NBA in field goal percentage. Bob Pettit mostly shot from the perimeter. That has been a historically lower percentage shot, but he was a great jump shooter out to 17, 18 feet. I believe if he played in today's league, he probably would have been a really good three-point shooter, close to what Kevin Love did, probably somewhere around, I don't know, I'm just guessing. He probably would have been 37, 38% from three or whatever. He was about an 80% foul shooter. Um, Bob Pettit is considered one of the greatest offensive rebounders in the history of the NBA. He and Moses Malone are considered two of the greatest offensive rebounders on a consistent basis the league has ever seen. Another thing that has to be mentioned about those St. Louis Hawks teams of the late 50s and 60s is that even though the league was at a faster pace, they played a slower pace than everybody else. And I say that for this. Um, if Bob Pettit played, let's say, on another team, let's say he played with the Royals or a faster paced team, the Warriors, I think his numbers would have been even greater. Instead of career averages of maybe 26 and 16, he may have averaged more like 28 and maybe 18 or 19. I think his numbers would have been even more impressive. Bob Pettit was also a guy that was a premier playoff performer. He usually upped the ante in the playoffs um, as far as his performances are concerned. His greatest season, and this is why I tell you, I think he would have been greater had he played in a faster pace on a faster paced team. The fastest paced season in the history of the NBA, the peak, was the 1961-62 season. That's the year the Wilt averaged 50. All right, they're going along with 25.7 rebounds. That's the year that Elgin Baylor, in 48 games of play, because he had required military service, army service, excuse me, he averaged 38.3 points per game. You know, Baylor's the only player outside of Wilt Chamberlain to exceed 38 points a game in an NBA season. But it's also the highest scoring season of Bob Pettit's career. And he was actually going toward the downside of his career. That year, I believe he averaged something like 32 points a game or close to 32 points a game. And I can't remember his rebounding, but it might have been like 17 or so rebounds per game. Um, and Bob Pettit improved as a player too with his efficiency. The last half of his career, Bob Pettit averaged close to 27 points a game, 17 points per game, on 45% shooting from the floor. And Bob Pettit was also a guy that was just trying to think of different aspects of his game to talk about. Even though he was a jump shooter, what differentiates him from Bob Pettit, excuse me, from Kevin Love, is that Kevin Love, even though he had, everybody talks about the moment when he shut down Steph Curry. Kevin Love has been a notoriously poor defender. Okay, there's always been a knock on him. He's never been a guy that you would call a great defender. Bob Pettit, he wasn't Akeem Olajuwon. He wasn't Dennis Rodman. But for the era that he played in, he was a capable defender. Um, One of the guys that people would compare him to as far as defensive level will maybe be someone like Karl Malone. Karl Malone was never going to be a defensive monster, but he's also not Charles Barkley. You know, he's not this guy that is a general liability on the defensive end. Karl Malone, he gave you effort. He would get strips. Wasn't a great shot blocker, but he would get strips and things of that nature might help out, be effective on the help defensive side. He wasn't a slob, you know what I'm saying, on the defense. And that's Bob Pettit. He wasn't a lockdown defender, but he was a guy that put maximum effort on both sides of the basketball court. And back then, players were expected to play at a high level on both ends of the court, and to be considered a GOAT level player, you had to play uh, high on, at least give effort, at least on both sides of the court. It's only been the last 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years, where the defensive side of the court is like, doesn't exist anymore. It's only about scoring. And that's why some of these guys like Dame Lillard and Trae Young, I just don't look at them as the same level of basketball players some other guys do, because I need you to play on a high level on both ends of the court before I start calling you the best player in the league. As we've seen, Steph Curry listen to the criticisms and he improved on the defensive side. He's not, I'm not saying he's, you know, uh, 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 I'm not saying he's Michael Jordan or Scottie Pippen, on the defensive side. But he's gotten a lot. What else do I want to say about Bob Pettit? He had a knack for getting to the foul line. I believe he averaged about 10 free throw attempts per game in his career. Even though he did shoot a lot of jump shots, he was a faceted guy. He would face up and be effective and could knock down jumpers, but he also was a relentless offensive rebounder. And because of that, obviously, he's going to get fouled. There's going to be contact, and he was going to the line. So Bob Pettit once said something about basically how he played was he thought that offensive rebounding, he would get you about 4 or 5 putbacks. That'll be 8 to 10 points. Uh, he would get to the line 10 times, make 7 of them. So that's 17. And then the rest of his points would come off of jumpers. He says pretty much how he tried to map out his scoring in each particular game. And that's how that went. The funny thing about it, Bob Pettit, when he first started playing basketball, his father was the one that pushed him to basketball. And if he was going to play basketball, he had to play at a high level. Um, Pettit was not particularly good at, if I remember correctly, he was not very good playing with his back to the basket at first, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he wasn't very good playing with his back to the basket, but he learned how to be effective doing that. And that added a crucial dimension to his game and made him more unstoppable. And another thing about Bob Pettit, when he was very pioneering, is Bob Pettit was the first real star, the first real player to prominently uh, lift weights. Before that, most people thought it was a detriment to do that. It would throw off your shot, which can happen. And I suspect it has something to do with why Steph Curry, a little bit, not all of it, but I think it has something to do with why Steph Curry's shot has been a little bit off this year because of the slight weight gain. You get stronger. It can throw off your muscle memory. And what is a shot that normally goes in with high regularity is now a little bit off, you know. But Bob Pettit, when he started playing, he was 205 pounds, 6'9". At his heaviest, he was about 240. So he played between 235 and 240. He got stronger, he got bigger. It did take away from him as far as speed is concerned, but it didn't hurt him because, like I said, because of the system that the then St. Louis Hawks played in. All right. So, in a nutshell, there's some similarities between Bob Pettit and Kevin Love, but that's about it. There's just some similarities. Um, Bob Pettit was the first player to score, he was the first player to score 2,100 points in a season. The first guy to get 2,000 points was George Yardley, the 57-58 season. Um, but Pettit was the first guy to get 2,100 points in a season. Uh, Bob Pettit led the NBA in scoring twice. Bob Pettit, I believe, was a 2-time MVP. And I believe he was tied with Kobe Bryant for the most MVPs in the All-Star game with 4. And one thing that Bob Pettit said in an interview not too long ago, and he's still remarkably sharp for a guy that's pushing 90 years of age, is that the All-Star games when he played were even more competitive than the All-Star games in the 80s and 90s, which are far more competitive than the All-Star games of today. These guys really played like it was an actual game. These games, these players took personally. They wanted to showcase who was the best player. That was the competitive nature of basketball at that time. Whereas today, everything's kumbaya. Guys are just happy. They just want to put on show, pad the numbers a little bit, get paid, fuck bitches, and it's all good. Not all of them, but most of them. But some of you guys